Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joseph Attic, Executive Chairman of ID for Africa, and I'm coming to you live from New York. I would like to welcome you to this milestone 10th LiveCast episode. This is part one of a two-part series, which we will continue on January 14, dedicated to the pathways to identity system development. Today, we will cover open source initiatives, and on January 14, we will cover open APIs. But before I put this episode in context and we delve into the subject at hand, I have a couple of announcements to make. Next week, we are launching ID for Africa 2020, a 3-day virtual event we are calling the Marathon of Innovations. How is this different than LiveCasts? It is complementary. The LiveCasts focus on policy, governance, legal frameworks, strategy, and lessons learned from country experiences. By design, they have not emphasized technology because we did not want technical discussions to dictate policy on identity matters. But as much as they are valuable, the LiveCasts are not enough on their own. Business and technological innovations have an important role to play in a holistic approach to identity management. And we would not be serving the community well if we do not expose it to the state of the art available in this domain. So having characterized the Identity for Development Challenge and framed it in the right context with the right priorities within 10 LiveCast episodes, we can now afford to close the year by turning our attention to technology matters within a concentrated event. It is thus with this complementarity that I ask everyone to look at the Marathon of Innovations. It's not a standalone event, but is part and parcel of our knowledge-sharing channels, which include the LiveCasts, the Marathon, and our physical annual meeting, which we still hope to hold in October 2021 in one form or another. The Marathon has two main structured knowledge and capacity building circuits. The first is the symposium circuit. Here, working with our ambassadors, we have selected a lineup of 24 presentations that address innovations in digital identity, service delivery, mobile platforms, future of credentials, and the future of population movement. The symposium circuit culminates with something which has become a highlight and a tradition of our AGM, the fishbowl. Yes, we are bringing the fishbowl back in this virtual format. I'll moderate this session as I have done in our past physical events, and will bring to it the style of the LiveCast community voices, where anyone in the audience can be promoted to the panel. Collectively, we will develop take-home messages that sum up what we have learned at the Marathon and outline the open challenges and opportunities. Another exciting circuit at the Marathon is the Innovation World Tour. This has never been done before. On this tour, we will be making 42 stops around the world in 3 days in search of solutions and practical ideas for this new era, and we'll bring them to you live right on your desktop or mobile devices. At each stop, you will hear from innovators directly from their hubs or showrooms about what they can offer to make identity management safer, better, and more adapted to the current objectives of development. So please register, attend, and take advantage of the Marathon. A lot of work has gone into putting it together and to adapting the opportunity to the new virtual medium. Hope to see you there next week. Registration link is in the chat. Okay, back to today's episode. Let me put the subject in context. In January 2018, we did a significant survey of African government identity stakeholders. In one section of the survey, we asked participants to rank order their satisfaction with several aspects of their vendor-implemented identity solution. What we learned was eye-opening and led to a call for action and a subsequent emergence of pathways to identity development. Here is a slide from that survey. As you can see, respondents believed that they were vendor-locked. This was their number one concern. They believed they were highly dependent on whoever supplied them with the solution in the first place and had difficulty making changes. Nevertheless, they still believed that their systems conformed to international standards. This clearly showed that a new kind of standards were needed in order to free customers from vendor lock-in while maintaining what the customers believe to be state-of-the-art innovations, performance, and quality. Focusing on vendor lock-in as a problem, several approaches emerged in 2019 as possible solutions. These include open source initiatives and open APIs. They are both pathways to identity, or more broadly, system or solution development that promise to alleviate vendor or technology lock-in and give customers the freedom and flexibility to adapt their solutions to their evolving needs. As I indicated, today we will explore open source initiatives, and on January 14, we have a lineup that will share the sectorial experience with open APIs from banking, telecom, and identity. But before we start, I'd like to emphasize that ID for Africa does not endorse any particular solution or pathway. Our goal is to inform while maintaining neutrality. However, there's something in this regard that we do endorse. No matter what pathway is chosen for identity development, ID for Africa advocates that the system design and end result should conform to the principles on identification for sustainable development. These principles were initially formulated in 2017 and have gone through a second fundamental revision this year and will be published in early January. As we will hear today, these are the results of a collaboration among several dozen international development agencies, NGOs, civil society. ID for Africa is an integral member of that group, and we wholeheartedly endorse these principles. Now, before I welcome the panel and explain to you how we will run the episode, I'd like to thank our development partners, the Gates and Omidyar Foundation, for their support and for making the LiveCasts possible. So thank you very much for continuing to be with us. Now, I'd like to ask the operator to bring in the panel. With us today, of course, welcome Vyjayanti Desai from the World Bank. We have Edward Duffus from Plan International or Open CRVS. We have Sanjay Jain from MOSIP. We have Ibrahima Conde from Guinea. We have Nordhaug from the Digital Public Goods Alliance, who I believe is representing Digital Public Goods Alliance, but she's from NORAD. We have Lesley-Ann Vaughn, who is with Mojaloop. We have Marte Camara, who is representing Guinea. We also have Yodahe Zemichael representing Ethiopia. Did I miss anybody on the screen? I think that may be everybody. So welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. This promises to be an exciting session. What we are going to do, we're going to run through a few keynote presentations. In between, we would like to bring in the community voices so we can hear from you and animate the discussion, see how you feel about what you're hearing, see what this represents to your country experience. So please don't be shy. When I say raise your hand for community voices, please participate. We will have ample opportunities to do so. So without any further delay, and having thanked the panel, I'd like to ask Vyjayanti to stay with us and take the stage and share her screen for the first keynote, which will be on the principles for identification for development. Okay, when we'll be back.
Great, thank you so much, Joseph. I just want to check whether you can see.
We can see.
You can see my screen? Okay, great. Thanks again for this opportunity and for joining this wonderful panel of colleagues. Joseph had asked me to talk about the principles on identification for sustainable development and the relevance to the topic today on digital public goods. I'll try to keep it brief because the panel is a tremendous panel and I'd much rather hear from everyone than go through a very long presentation. But first on the principles, in 2017, as Joseph mentioned, in the absence of a normative framework for ID systems, there was a group of 25 organizations that came together in quite an organic way to create a shared vision for what we see as aspirational goals for good ID systems. And the purpose of this was to provide a reference for how countries could maximize development benefits while also mitigating the risks. And as you can see, some aspects of this that are really core to the way that much of what we've done is around pillars of inclusion and trust for individuals to enhance their access to rights, services, and the formal economy. The 10 original principles are centered around 3 broad pillars, but cover issues such as universal coverage for individuals from birth to death, free from discrimination, removing barriers to access, establishing unique, secure, accurate identity, creating interoperable platforms, use of open standards, and ensuring that there's vendor and technology neutrality, protecting user privacy and control through system design, operational sustainability, safeguarding data privacy, security, user rights, establishing institutional mandates, and enforcing legal and trust frameworks. And what we did a few years ago as a group of organizations that quite organically came together is to say, let's keep this as a living document, that the agenda is changing every year as we speak, and to keep it relevant to reconvene every 3 years or so. And so this year we went through the process of reviewing the principles among the endorsing organizations. It was also put online for public consultation. There was a civil society consultation that was facilitated by a few civil society organizations, but many more who joined. And the updated principles will be released in January and early 2021. And essentially the principles, what everyone found is it was quite sound. There weren't significant fundamental changes, but what the summary of the updates is really improving on the clarity of the benefits and also the risks that emerge, clarifying definitions and scope of the principles, and really emphasizing data protection, public participation, and the user centricity. So to what we really care about is the impact of the principles. We know that over the last 3-4 years, it's been downloaded over 28,000 times. There's English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese versions of the principles. We've seen that it's been applied in and by various global initiatives, whether it's the UN High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, or the G7 Digital Financial Inclusion Initiative, UNHCR's I Belong campaign, the Financial Action Task Force, which really issues a lot of the Know Your Customer regulations, has incorporated into the guidance note, and many more others. But what's most important is how we've seen countries really infuse and adopt the thinking of the principles into whether it's the policies, the technical design, or laws of their systems. And in West Africa, and you might hear from Guinea later on this, how 6 countries in West Africa who are part of the West Africa Regional Initiative, which will be facilitating over 100 million people with IDs, have incorporated it into a lot of the policy and frameworks. Things such as registration, which will be open to all residents, initial registration strategy that will be prioritizing vulnerable people and having foundational ID issued free of charge. Or whether it's Nigeria, where the principles were incorporated into the government's strategic roadmap, and we're seeing a lot of impact, whether it's on passing data protection law and operationalizing the Data Protection Commission, reducing the number of data fields, introducing front-end tokenization, removing some legal barriers for things like eligibility criteria and documentation requirements, streamlining those, and many others, such as in Somalia, embedding it in the government policy, ensuring that it'll have inclusive registration, committing to data protection, or in Sudan, implementing reforms to remove legal barriers for women and girls. And you'll also hear from Ethiopia, where it's part of the digital strategy. We've also, as an institution, really incorporated them into a lot of the thinking of our or whether it's our practitioners' notes, the various guidance pieces on things like inclusive enrollment strategies for people with disability or for women, thinking about the approach and how it helps frame the work on the data protection and privacy by design, on some of the technology issues such as procurement, open source, and others. So to the relevance of principles to today's topic on digital public goods. So we know at least 4 of the principles really call for a number of key issues that are sort of core to digital public goods, whether it's on open source and open standards and also open platform thinking. In particular, creating interoperable platforms, avoiding vendor and technology lock-in, protecting privacy and agency through system design and planning for financial and operational sustainability. And we really see how the thinking of digital public goods can be a real game changer for the ID agenda, and how it has such tremendous potential to accelerate inclusive and trusted ID systems. I also want to just note that it's not really, it's a sort of a false distinction of open source versus open standards. These are really broader efforts for digital public goods that can work in complement. I also wanted to sort of talk a bit about how we're starting to see many countries move away from ID as a siloed effort, but really how ID, together with a number of core digital public platforms, whether it's on payments or trusted data exchange and interoperability, are really forming a powerful digital stack. And this digital stack, which I'm sure you'll hear from some of the other panelists, are really enabling an inclusive and trusted digital economy, whether it's around the goals of data empowerment, cashless, paperless, remote transactions. And it's quite a fundamental shift in thinking about ID as a siloed effort to ID as part of this broader digital transformation effort. And I'm going to end with three core messages. And I think the COVID pandemic, if anything, has really shined a light on the importance of this agenda, both on the broader digital public goods, as well as on ID, but creating this demand and opportunity for, and the importance of balancing really this sense of urgency, but also ensuring that it's done responsibly. And the principles offers a wonderful framework and an advocacy tool to ensure that the ID systems are in place and done in a trusted way. Second, it also, as I mentioned, really has highlighted the benefits of designing ID systems as part of this broader digital public goods, digital stack. And we've seen how countries that have linked ID, payments, and data interoperability, all done responsibly, were really better equipped to respond with a lot of the emergency cash payments, as well as shifting some of their transactions from physical to online service delivery. And last, digital public goods such as open source software and open standards are essential tools for really realizing principles at scales. It promotes a lot of the interoperability, reduces vendor lock-in, as Joseph mentioned, and really provides at scale privacy by design in a way that that we've never seen before. So I think we're at a tipping point and a wonderful community that's coming together. We're very excited by the possibilities and the countries that are really embracing this thinking. I'm going to stop there, Joseph. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vyjayanti. So while we warm up the audience, if you would like to make a comment or participate in the discussion, just raise your hand and the operator will bring you on. Vyjayanti, while we're waiting, just a quick question. Were you surprised how extensive this cycle of revision was, even though it was basically reconfirming the principles? it took a long time. And how do you attribute this? Is it more engagement? Is it every word counts? Just give people a feel for what was involved, and that each word is not something that is random.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the beauty of having a number of organizations that come together to really think through the precise wording and the implications that it means. It was both took a little bit longer, but also was not very complicated. And I think one of the things that I saw is we built this sort of trusted common platform over the many years, all of us together. And so I think we all understand the different lenses by which different agencies and development actors are considering an issue. I think COVID was part of it, to be honest. Many organizations have been slammed by very, very late nights and sleepless nights, just working around the clock. And so some of it was also just the fact that, these principles were being revised at a time where 100 other things were also on people's plate. So some of it is just some of that practical. But to be honest, I I thought it was wonderful opportunity to have it in a more open public consultation, also engaging with civil society organizations. I think this is just the beginning of that journey of really engaging and incorporating some of the thinking of some of the organizations that may not be endorsing organizations, but have a lot to contribute to this agenda.
Speaking of endorsing organizations, where is the cycle on this? Last round, can you share how many endorsing organizations were there? And then what is the process for organizations to endorse, and who is it open to?
So it's in the last round, there were 25 organizations that have endorsed the original set of principles. And we've been told there's a few other organizations that are considering also endorsing. Everyone is going through the process of getting their internal clearances. In terms of the ability to endorse and being open to other organizations, I think the organizations that really ascribe and aspire and are working actively to try and reach these goals are certainly welcome. And then there's a process by which the current organizations can, just say, okay, but we've never actually said no to any organization because everyone who is coming at this has really been thinking along the goals of a common vision and these aspirational goals.
And can governments endorse?
Yes, of course.
Any government agencies can actually endorse. There was one of the questions from the audience asking about how did the World Bank, or how does the World Bank use these principles, and how do you recommend government agencies use them?
So we've used them very, very actively, I think, in all our country work and country dialogue. It helps frame the discussions with our country clients. Some of those examples that I've mentioned in the earlier slide were through dialogue and working with many of the countries to see those being realized. And also we've seen countries where it wasn't through an active discussion incorporating into the policy. So I think the end goal is to really have these being owned and applied by countries. That's in the end the goal of these. So many of, whether it's the countries in West Africa through the discussions, or Nigeria, Somalia, those were all through the discussion and dialogue that we've had. And also through, as I mentioned, our knowledge products and a lot of the thinking and framing of our efforts. So we very actively, for us, it's not a document that sits on a shelf by any means.
Right. But are you using it in a prescriptive way? I mean, basically somebody's asking, do you make sure that countries that receive your funding adhere to these principles, and do you audit it? Or is it just recommended?
There's no auditing of it. There's, there's obviously a strong desire, and for us, it's not a one-time conversation. It's it's a partnership that we have over many years, and whether it's through support on assessments to help see how far a certain context may be from these aspirational goals, and then providing technical support as well as any financing needs. So it's not a prescriptive tool, but it certainly is very core to the way we provide the support, both knowledge, technical, and financial support.
And in principle, it becomes part of your PAD, your project assessment document. You assess how far are they from the principles, and perhaps guide them through that process. It's not a prescription.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got with us a community voice. Could you please introduce yourself and say what organization, who you are with?
Hello, I'm Anubha. I'm from the Center for Internet and Society, India. Thank you for giving this opportunity to share my question. And I've also put it on the Q&A in the Q&A chat box. My question is essentially about Vyjayanti's opinion on, what changes to the principles do you think stand to have the most transformative potential to ID and ID for development? Thank you.
First of all, thank you. I know CIS had provided some really wonderful extensive comments on the principles during the public consultation. So thanks for that. We will be also circulating. Again, also, I just want to reiterate, these are not World Bank principles. We help in facilitating these, but we will certainly also circulate the current version of the principles. And would encourage all the other endorsing organizations to do the same. I think the most, as I mentioned in the slide, it's really emphasizing much of the importance of data protection, ensuring that some of the risks that we see currently already exist in even in existing systems aren't further exacerbated by new technologies, for example, or that, for example, not having an ID, we know is a barrier for access to services, so that these aren't further exacerbating some of the inequalities that exist. So these were more in the context setting of recognizing some of these risks, addressing them, ensuring, I think, and the principles itself is really strengthening the voice of civil society and consultations, so that comes out more strongly. So it's really more of a strengthening of what was always intended, but may not have been as voiced as clearly.
Okay, there's a lot more to discuss. I see somebody raise their hand, or this is a mistake. If not, Vyjayanti, stand by. I want to bring in Liv, and then perhaps there will be a question that might involve both of you, because the Digital Public Goods Alliance has a standard, and some of their indicators have a reading on the principles. So why don't we have Liv now take the screen and share her presentation, and then we'll start a discussion. Perhaps we'll bring in Vyjayanti back again. Okay, was this a mistake about somebody that raised their hand? If this was not a mistake, tell them that we'll bring them back after this session. Liv, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joseph.
And one request. I request the speakers to speak a little slower, because the translators have been complaining a little bit about the speed.
Yep. I will share my screen, and just let me know if you can see it. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
That's excellent. So thank you so much. So there is growing consensus that in order for countries to be able to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, there really is a need for a digital transformation. And that is the reason why the UN Secretary General in 2018 decided to establish a high-level panel on digital cooperation, which was tasked with looking into where there was really a potential for creating new digital cooperation mechanisms. And the key recommendation of the panel in its report that came out in 2019 was the establishment of a multi-stakeholder alliance for digital public goods. The aim was to accelerate attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals by facilitating the discovery, development, use of, and investment in digital public goods. And I will come back to the definition and standard a bit later. The Digital Public Goods Alliance is a direct answer to that call, and it's a multi-stakeholder alliance co-founded by the governments of Sierra Leone and Norway, and the Indian think tank iSpirit and UNICEF. And the Secretariat of the Alliance is co-hosted by UNICEF and the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD, and I am the Secretariat co-lead from NORAD, and that's the capacity I'm speaking in here today. So we do have, in a way, our roadmap and our mandate that is coming directly from the UN Secretary General himself. In June 2020, he published a roadmap that showed the world how he wanted to follow up on the high-level panel's recommendations. And in this roadmap, he strongly commended the work of the Alliance and endorsed it. And he also encouraged member states, the UN system, and the private sector to implement digital public goods, both as a direct response to the then ongoing COVID-19 crisis, but also for more long-term attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. And in alignment with the Secretary General's roadmap, the definition that we use of digital public goods is open source software, open data, open AI models, open standards, and open content. And these digital public goods should adhere to privacy and other applicable laws and best practices, do no harm, and help attain the Sustainable Development Goals. And Joseph, you asked about the standard, and the standard, that is how we have operationalized the UN Secretary General's definition. And it is a 9-indicator open standard that is managed by the Secretariat and that all digital public goods must meet. And the standard is in itself an open project that can be submitted and contributed to. I think that's very important. I do want to spend some time on key characteristics of digital public goods in general, but I will also be happy to take any questions about the standard later, together with Vyjayanti. But in general, I can say now that we do feel that these are very well aligned with the principles that Vyjayanti were talking about. And this is more likely a minimum definition, and I will come back to that. Because I think the particular digital public goods that we're discussing here today that relate to technologies that form parts of countries' digital foundations, they have some characteristics that sort of go beyond a minimum definition, I would say, of digital public goods. And I will speak a bit to that now. So first of all, digital public goods must be open source. They must have open source code. And this is fundamental both for ensuring that the technology can be adopted, that it can be freely reused, but also that it can be adapted to fit local needs. And I think this is very important also to avoid the vendor lock-in that was pointed out in the survey you conducted. I also think it's important to emphasize that using open source codes, it provides also transparency and insights into how the technology has been designed. And it makes it easier to assess how important considerations have been made around issues such as user security and privacy. So the transparency by design feature is also very important. But some digital public goods are more foundational than others, and those we're talking about today, they are. And by foundational, I mean that they create the backbones of public service delivery, and they are enablers across sectors. So in a way, you can separate maybe the most foundational from others that are more functional and that can also be enabling, but more within one or two sectors. But there are some that are more foundational. And I also quickly want to say something about the dual meaning of public, because sometimes that creates confusion. So when we talk about digital public goods from the Digital Public Goods Alliance side, we're referring to the economics definition of a public good. And that means that it's non-rivalrous in the sense that one person's use does not limit someone else's use, but also that it's non-excludable, meaning that it is impossible or very costly to exclude someone from using the good. And comparatively, when the term digital public infrastructure is used, public often, it normally implies that the technologies in question are implemented as backbones or enablers of public service delivery. And this is important because when we talk about the technologies that will be touched upon more later by Sanjay and Ed, we are talking about digital public goods that are also foundational digital public infrastructures. They are open source, but they are also, in addition to that, they are foundational technologies that enable other technologies to be built on top of them. And they are cross-sectorally enabling. And in the Digital Public Goods Alliance, we have convened a community of practice constituted by experts from many stakeholders, including those that are represented here today, many of those. And we have looked into and arrived at 7 technologies that are particularly interesting from a financial inclusion perspective. And 2 of them will be, or 3 of them, I think, will be presented afterwards, and are what we're focusing on today. And these countries are really important for enabling, these technologies are really important for enabling countries to build out their foundational infrastructures and to enable economic inclusion and financial service delivery, and can have impact across multiple digital sustainable development goals. And if we think of different technology layers in a stack, Vyjayanti was also mentioning this concept of a stack of technologies. Digital identity systems constitute one of the most fundamental layers. So in the process I referred to above, both OpenCRVS and MOSIP, and also Mojaloop, apologies for not having Mojaloop on the page, have been verified as digital public goods and foundational digital public infrastructures. And you will hear more about these afterwards from Sanjay and Ed. And because both of these technologies are open source, I think this is another way of highlighting the value of open source, because it can also facilitate piloting and sandboxing, to use that term, around how you can integrate these technologies to cater to new use cases. So for instance, I am aware that there has been piloting of integrations between MOSIP and OpenCRVS, but also that both of these technologies have piloted integrations with a well-known open source health information system called DHIS2. And again, this is facilitated and made possible by open source. I wanted to end my presentation here today with making 3 linked calls to action. And I think they resonate quite well also with what Vyjayanti was saying. We need to make sure, I think, that we provide stable and significant support to these kind of core public goods, the MOSIPs, the OpenCRVSs, the Mojaloops, so that countries can depend on them and trust them and know that they will be there over time. Because I think that is something any country will look for, is the predictability of knowing that the solution they are making their systems dependent on will continue to exist and be maintained. So I think there is a responsibility from the international community here to help strengthen individual projects, but also to think of the ecosystem beyond. And that includes our procurement practices. We need to have procurements that actually take into account the opportunity of procuring services for open source rather than procuring the technology itself. And I also think that the issue of country capacity and ownership and that opportunity to over time also co-create and build upon and manage these technologies is very important and easily neglected. I think we must be very careful to harness and share and also require best practices, particularly if we're channeling more funding, both on the design side, but also on the implementation side. And I do think that the work that has been done by, led by Vyjayanti and the World Bank and that team has been tremendously important for really embedding the ID for development ecosystem with a best practice approach. And lastly, we need to both pull more funding into this space, but also fund differently and more aligned. And again, I think that channeling more to building country capacity to ensure that there is ownership, agency, and sovereignty around managing these technologies, these digital public infrastructures, is particularly important, especially for areas like digital identity that everything else is built on top of. Thank you.
Liv, thank you. Thank you so much. There are quite a few questions that have emerged for you from the audience. Speaking of capacity, there is resonance with you on the question that you need to build capacity. The concern that countries have been raising is the fact that consultants that are competent to deal with open source, which is viewed as complex in their eyes, tend to be expensive. And then when they end up training their people, they reach a point where they become valuable for others and therefore get recruited. So they're saying, what can you do about this vicious cycle where we continually lack capacity?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. And I can give an example of someone who has found a good way of addressing it. And it's something I can also say that we are looking into from the Alliance's end. You heard me mention the example of DHIS2, which is part of the Health Information Systems Program. DHIS2 is an open source system which is in use as a national system in 72 countries, I believe, with a global footprint of 2.3 billion people. So it's the most scaled digital public good that I'm aware of. One of the key reasons for this success, if you ask anyone involved in that initiative, is that country capacity has been built through academic scholarships. So there has been implementation research through master's and PhD scholarships, very often for both staff in government institutions that have been involved in the health ministries, for instance, and the health directorates, so that there has been an opportunity to be able to also fund someone to engage deeply with piloting and rollout of the systems in countries for significant periods of time, which means that there has been a community built now around HISP, which numbers, I think, in the 4,000 to 5,000 of people that actually have expertise and have somehow been involved. So, but the short answer here is find mechanisms, for instance, through links to academia and scholarships that can facilitate long-term engagement and country ownership and implementation research. That's one part of the answer, at least.
Okay, so one part of the answer is we were hearing support academic scholarships, get people trained early on with a certain level of commitment to say, after I'm finished, I need to serve my country, I need to work in the public open source project. What about the role of the private sector? And if I can ask you to slow down your speed because the translators are getting a bit angry, they can't keep up.
Yeah, I will slow down a bit. The role of the private sector is of course very important, but as I said, I think the discussion around how to shift procurement practices also involves what role the private sector needs to play, which is a huge role. But it's it's probably going to be more than around integration services and service delivery and also capacity building. But so there's definitely a strong role, but I think there's a need to look at the whole ecosystem and which parts of that ecosystem the private sector needs to fill. So it's definitely an important part, and open source needs to involve the private sector. There is no dichotomy there. Yeah.
I mean, we'll get back to this question at the end, but since you all will be en route at the end, I want to benefit from your presence and say, in fact, there is a misconception sometimes by the private industry that you're giving away something and therefore they cannot make money from it. And as a result, they don't invest in being part of the ecosystem. What would you say to them about that misconception from the Digital Public Goods Alliance? Do you encourage the private sector to profit from creating opportunities for them?
There are many dimensions to that question, and I think it is a misconception that there is no opportunity for value creation around open source. And there are many nuances in which kinds of licensing is being used and what kind of opportunity there is, for instance, for making commercial spin-offs and for making complementary and adjacent services and technologies and applications built on top. And again, I want to take this back to the fact that today we're discussing these foundational digital public infrastructures, where it is particularly important to avoid monopolies and to have vendor diversity. And I think that vendor diversity can better be catered for if you have open standards and open source and interoperability requirements, enabling other things to be built on top by the private sector indeed. So the answer is, I think the total value distribution and the opportunity for multiple private sector stakeholders to make more money is actually greater in the paradigm we're discussing now than in a more monopolistic system where you have fewer stakeholders that take most of the gains.
Yeah, in that regard, there's a question basically about smaller contributors. How can they join the Digital Public Goods Alliance, and how can they profit in their participation? So is there a procedure by which they can nominate, they can participate? Could you please explain?
Yes. So we are building up many of these structures now, but there's an immediate opportunity to nominate potential digital public goods through a submission page that we have and a GitHub process we have on the Alliance's homepage. And the benefits from that so far is that we are both trying to connect where we see digital public goods that have high impact potential, because we're looking for those. We're not looking for anything. We're looking for those that can really be of benefit for helping attain the Sustainable Development Goals. We are looking at trying to link them both to technical support opportunities, but also trying to mobilize interest around funding. And we are indeed doing this now and working with many other stakeholders that were part of those that have also endorsed the principles that Vyjayanti talked about to look into the potential of leveraging more funding to support those digital public goods that are identified as having the most impact potential. So yes, I think there is definitely an opportunity. And we are also looking at expanding the ways that individuals and the technical community can contribute more over some time. Okay.
Now, I'm under the impression that you've got in your pipeline 485 candidate digital public goods. Do you have the bandwidth and the capacity to assess and go through all of that?
Yes, and that brings me back to the standard. So as I was saying, the digital public goods standard is a minimum verification. So what we are doing now is that we are verifying, and we are in process of going from those 480 and going through that, how should I say it? It's not that backlog, and verifying those against the minimum standard. And we're making headway on that. However, we do select a few. As I mentioned, we have selected 7 foundational digital public infrastructures that could be relevant for financial inclusion, including OpenCRVS, MOSIP, and Mojaloop. And these are now being assessed in more detail. And in this deeper assessment, we're looking at alignment and full alignment, for instance, with the principles that Vyjayanti mentioned, because there are certain principles that are more important for the most foundational technologies than for everything else. So we do the minimum verification of all denominations, but then we work with expert communities to select which ones we focus in more depth on. And these we spend more time on, both highlighting case studies and information really that governments also will be looking for when considering implementation. So you could say that we have a two-step approach.
Okay, now let's bring Vyjayanti back. I have got one question for her that involves both of you, but while she's getting back on, what is the benefit of being recognized as a digital public good by your alliance? What do the authors benefit from?
That question was to me, right? Yeah.
Yes. Wait.
Yes, no, so as I was saying, being recognized, and particularly then if you are being highlighted as of particular high impact potential related to, for instance, the problem sets we're discussing today around ID, is that we are mobilizing both resources, technical expertise, and funding that can help bolster these kinds of technologies. And in particular, we're looking also to change the narrative around how these technologies are supported. For instance, by advocating for long-term funding and predictable funding. And I can, for instance, mention that Nordhaug, the agency that I sit in as co-host of the Alliance, is already the first bilateral co-funder of MOSIP.
Okay.
Yeah, so we are one of the funders there, as an example. So that is Norway as a stakeholder in the Digital Public Goods Alliance has decided to fund MOSIP and is already doing that.
Okay, understood. So two questions for both of you. One topic seems to be buzzing is the question of governance. Both of you have a different aspect of looking at it. Governance for the Digital Public Goods Alliance, for the standard, and then Vyjayanti, governance for the principles. Where do we stand? Maybe I'll start with Vyjayanti and then I'll come back to you, Liv. Where do we stand in the question of governance? Can you unmute? Yes.
So the governance of the principles itself, is that right?
Right.
So I think one of the beauty of the principles has been the way that this group of organizations have come together. Even though people keep referencing it as World Bank principles, or not everyone, but some people reference, it is by no means World Bank principles. We helped in facilitating. I think World Bank plays an important role as a convener for a number of different topics and agendas. This happens to be one. There's another that we are thinking about doing, particularly around the push for open standards. We know that some standards are not being embraced as much as others, so why not? And it's more in that role, not as a implementer or sort of supporter of some of these systems, but a convener role. So right now, I know that there's been like one organization in particular who was asking about a governance of the principles. I don't think I'm answering the question, but we're not the holder of the principles. It's a collective set of principles. We facilitated and helped in the drafting very much, but every organization that's an endorsing organization has, and you've been part of it, Joseph, you see the wordsmithing that happens with a number of different organizations. So we by no means, and it's a consensus document in the end. We have it sitting on our website, but we also know that other endorsing organizations should have it on their website. So I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly.
Governance
model.
It's
a set of aspirational goals. This is not an international treaty. This is not it's aspirational goals that we all see as good outcomes for good ID in the end.
Right, and this could change maybe over time. I mean, there could be a community could reach a conclusion that we need a governance structure, but at the moment there isn't for the principles, and that's a short answer.
And it's worked. So the question is, and this was discussed, why change something that's worked? We're seeing in the end countries embracing these principles, working hard to go from, if their current systems are not quite at the end goal, how to make the reforms. So if we're seeing that countries are actually embracing and adopting policies, practices, technical design towards these end goals, that's the end goal. So why change something that's not broken?
Understood. Liv, what about the Digital Public Goods Alliance and the standard? Do you have a governance model?
Yes, for the standard, we are really building upon the best from open source in having it as an open standard, which means that it's possible to submit a request to iterate or improve upon it. But of course, then you need to provide a reason why that is needed. And we have already had, since we launched it, we've already had small tweaks and updates. And that is really based on stress testing, on reality, and making sure that we fine tune and try to find a balance between what is realistic and what actually fits with the world out there, but at the same time that we really strive to drive change and inspire in the right direction. So it is an open standard, but the governance is, of course, that there is then a structure for deciding when to make changes or not. And then we provide explanations for which changes, what recommendations we take on board and which we do not.
And so when you issue a conclusion that something is a digital public good, is that a certificate that there is a board, a committee that signs off on, or how does that work?
No, so the verification against the standard is simply then doing a check against the indicators, the 9 indicators there. Is to look if the licensing is correct, if the source code is available in a public repository, etc., and to check off. But some of it is based on self-nomination. So we are not doing, and that's why I'm referring to it as a minimum verification. So we do not do a deep investigation in the first round, but that is what we do with those we shortlist. We go deeper. Okay. And those are the 7 that I mentioned, and several of which are represented here today.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question that may be controversial for both of you now. And this is when I look at the standard and I look at the principles, we see there's one thing that stands out that's different between the two. And obviously they're applying to very different things. But one thing that is absent is the do no harm. Do no harm appears in your standard. And as you know, Vyjayanti, we had this discussion in the do no harm, and the do no harm was kind of moved out of the principles. So what is your vision, Liv, of do no harm? And what is your reaction, Vyjayanti, why we did not end up with a do no harm in the principles? Because we would have thought that an ID system should not do any harm, should be part of the principles. Or do you think it's covered indirectly? So I'll start with Liv, and I'll come back to you, Vyjayanti.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. It's a question we also have debated a lot. So what I can say is that, again, it's about striving towards something. And I also think there is one very, very important dimension to highlight, that when we look at and verify a digital public good, we're looking at the generic technology. We're looking at, for instance, the MOSIP or the Open CRVS, but we are not looking at the national deployment in country X of that technology. And I think that is a very important dimension to highlight the difference, because where we can say that we can assess do no harm, it's in the intentions and in the design. And because there is a requirement for open source, there's an opportunity to actually have a fairly open discussion around how the design has been made. Right. But we do not feel that we can stretch that into how country X chooses to deploy a certain technology, because that will also depend very much on what kind of licensing requirement there is. Sometimes a country can deploy an open technology and deploy it in a proprietary way. And I think that is maybe a key responsibility, or sorry, a key reason for why there is a difference. And I don't think that that is necessarily incompatible, because it's about where in the value chain we're talking, and we're talking about the by design or in design stage.
The source.
Yes.
Right.
So,
Vyjayanti, how do you feel?
I completely disagree with you, Joseph, that the principles don't say anything about do no harm. I think it goes far beyond just saying those words, do no harm, and actually sort of spells out exactly what harm. And just I'm pulling up some of the wording, and the entire principles is actually about doing no harm. So even just specifically on the point of non-discrimination, all identification systems should be free from discrimination in policy and practice. This includes ensuring legal frameworks, requirements, and procedures to register, obtain, or use identification, and that the data is collected or displayed do not enable or reinforce discrimination against particular groups, such as those who may face increased risks of exclusion for cultural, political, economic, or other reasons, including poor people. I can keep going on. That's on the non-discrimination part. Then it goes on for data privacy and various rights violation, avoiding lock-in. I think the entire principles is actually about doing no harm.
It's spelled out the kind of harm that could come downstream, and that's the point. The point is, Liv's point is that they're sort of at the source, the intention. You're actually looking at the principles as they are applied in an implementation, and therefore you're spelling out the kind of harms that we could expect: discrimination, basically exclusion, invasion of privacy. So the answer is yes, they are there, but it's not spelled out. So for those who wonder why is do no harm is not in the principles, it's because the principles have spelled it out in the types of risks that can be expected. We admit that perhaps we have not spelled out all the types of risks, so there's no catch-all about do no harm, but that perhaps is an opportunity for evolution of the principles to start identifying those harms. Would you say that's a reasonable characterization, Vyjayanti?
Sure. Yeah. No, I would encourage everyone to read the principles and maybe conclude, but yeah, no, I think it's fair.
Right. Okay. So the absence of do no harm in the principle does not mean it's not there. It's just spelled out. It doesn't say do no harm. The whole principle has a coverage that covers many cases of harm.
Yeah, but I think going much further than just saying those words, do no harm. I think,
yeah. You've identified the types of risks that can be, and that's what took a long time to do.
And I think the revisions further strengthen some of the language on that.
Exactly. That's why it took a year to actually figure this out. I think that's where
it took a year because we're also very busy with helping countries. So unfortunately, that's probably what took up more of the time.
The convenience. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to continue, but I want to move on because we're running out of time for this segment. So I'll thank both of you. If you're able to stay around for the ending. If not, Liv, I know you're going to be en route. Maybe if you're able to log in audio, we can take you on audio. Otherwise, thank you so much for this valuable contribution. We have put in the chat a link to the Digital Public Goods Alliance, so people can go and see the details and examples of digital public goods that have been submitted and nominated. Thanks, Liv.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're going to continue. Now we're moving to another section where we're talking about specific digital public goods, ones that have a significant impact or significant potential. They're foundational, like Liv has identified, such as MOSIP, CRVS, and Mojaloop. Okay, so now I'd like to ask Sanjay to take over the platform and present briefly on MOSIP.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about MOSIP. I'm going to just get my slides on in a minute. Great. So we've heard MOSIP a couple of times today in the previous presentations. And I thought I would start with actually talking a little bit about what MOSIP is. So what is MOSIP? It is actually a project which is an open source, which is housed at the Indian Institute of Information Technology in Bangalore. We are supported by organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, NORAD, Omidyar Networks, and Tata Trusts. What we do is we build a platform for identity. We cover the complete ID lifecycle for the people who are going to use the ID, starting with issuance, verification. And for the authorities who are doing the issuing of ID, it provides a full platform that enables them to go beyond the ID in terms of service delivery. Because we are open source, we believe that people can adapt this system to whatever needs they have, and we encourage folks to do that. So when we think in terms of digital public goods and we think in terms of ID, we thought we would sort of identify the various aspects of MOSIP that help us with this identification. So the first is that it's built to be open. The idea is that we want to include everybody. There should be no exclusion. It's user-friendly. We worry a lot about privacy and consent and user control on their own data, and we enable that through various tools. We have set up the system so it is future-ready. It uses all the technologies that are available today, and as time passes and new technologies come in, we can replace these technologies and modules with whatever else is coming up in the world. We believe that countries are sovereign and they have to have full control on their systems. And in that sense, we emphasize a lot of control, continuity, and choice for the countries that are there. In this regard, I actually want to highlight, I think, what we heard earlier today in Joseph's presentation, where we spoke about the concerns that countries have around ID systems. And I think one of the top concerns is that they want to have full control on their own country implementations without worrying about the vendors they have. And this is one of the benefits we believe that we bring in and open source brings in, because you have the full source code and there's no lock-in to any vendor. If you need any support, there's an entire community out there available to support you. And further, I think in the conversation that we had with Liv, we heard about building capacity in countries, and that's something which MOSIP is committed to doing, and we'll talk about that later today in this conversation. But we want to make sure that countries have the capacity to make the necessary changes to these systems to suit their own needs without having to depend on any particular vendor. The beauty of such a system is it also reduces costs. It makes it much more cost effective. We use open standards. We have standard licensing systems. And we've started to build a strong ecosystem around this open base that we have. And last but not the least, data security is top of mind for us and is part of the entire system that we built. So just to emphasize on some of these points, the software that we have built is open source, and the whole code and documentation is available under the Mozilla Public License 2.0. It's out there on GitHub today. You can go to look at it. We built it as a platform. So we've taken away the monolithic ID system. So there's no single large ID system. It can actually be broken up into parts, and you can take the parts that you need or change the ones that you don't want to have in that particular way. We have set up interfaces and specifications which will allow other systems to integrate with it. So for example, you heard we discussed in pilot with OpenCRVS, where we looked at how OpenCRVS and MOSIP could work together, and we were able to successfully complete that. The other benefit of this is that it actually reduces the amount of lock-in even more. And finally, we think that digital ID, and the reason why we tackled this issue is that it's an important element of digital trust. So if you're setting up a new digital economy and we are looking at it growing in a very large way, you need to have trust as an underlying foundation on which a lot of which will get built. And this is really where we think an open source ID system like MOSIP plays a very, very big role. So just to highlight a little bit of our journey so far, we are a open source system. We are set up as a non-profit. We are actually, in fact, set up within a university system right now. We started out this project about a couple of years ago. And then within 1 year, we got to a reasonable point in our development where we were able to open source it out. So it was put up on GitHub and made available to anybody who wanted it. So this was then used for pilots, for other people to contribute and to get feedback. This year, when in February, we released our first general availability build, which is good enough to have a country implement it. And now we are enhancing the system further, and newer releases keep coming up. We have been fortunate. We have had 4 countries who put their trust in what we are building so far, and we are looking forward to working with many more. Morocco is one of the first implementers. We have had Philippines, and you're going to hear from Guinea today, and Ethiopia, which are all testing the system out, piloting it, building something with it, or doing a full-fledged implementation. We are in conversations with many more countries. We are looking for reference integrations right now. And as these happen, we will look to take the learnings from these implementations, build playbooks so that other countries can implement it in a much easier manner. We have an international advisory group and various working groups that are monitoring the system so that they can provide advice as and when required, as well as find ways to help out the countries that are implementing. We know that we cannot do this alone. So one of the most important decisions we made was that we actually would do the minimum possible to build an ID, and then we would work with an ecosystem to get it implemented, to get it out there. This ecosystem includes various commercial players and providers who provide either certain parts that we are not providing. So for example, biometrics technologies, or system integrations, or advisory services. And all of this put together will ensure that countries can build and get the power of the OpenID system. In addition to that, we are working with universities. We have an agreement with the Carnegie Mellon University and the Alan Turing Institute. CMU has a presence in Africa itself, and we are looking to build centers of excellence where people will be able to study the system and to see how it is being implemented. And I think Liv mentioned how useful that had turned out to be for DHIS. And we hope that we'll be able to find the same value out of here. And we're looking to establish many more. This is just the start of it. In addition to that, we have a collaboration with OpenCRVS, ID Pass. We have got contributions from multiple tech companies in the system. So altogether, we are looking to expand this ecosystem. This is just where we are right now. And we expect that we will need a much larger group to actually go out and accomplish what we intend to do. In terms of Africa, I think we found a lot of support from Africa in terms of what we are bringing to the table. And as a result, this always works, right? When you find people supporting, we also go back and bring in the focus to get in more effort there. So we have technology collaborations, we have adopters, we have people doing pilots, we are working on knowledge transfer, we are working with various alliances in Africa to start to get the word out, to make sure that there's more support. We are setting up learning hubs and civil and reference implementations. I'm sorry. And overall, we are looking to make sure that every country in Africa can be supported by what we are doing along with our partners. So I think that's. And finally, I thought I would put in some thoughts around what we think is important for the program to succeed. We believe that the 5 C's, control, cost, coverage, compatibility, and confidence are very important. We want to make sure that countries are in complete control on the implementation. They have no vendor lock-in, upgrades and evolution continue to stay easy. We want to keep costs down. And this is really not where they want to have the private sector make money. I think we heard the conversation earlier around how open source does not actually reduce the chances of people making money, but it changes the location. So while you don't look at an ID system as a place where you can extract rents, but where you can be the foundation for creating a digital economy. And the digital economy, the digitization process will bring in a large number of private sector players who will contribute in different ways. And we do think that they will all want to support such ID systems, because the faster countries digitize, the better it is for everyone, for the people, for the private sector, for the governments, and so on. We think that another part, again, you heard Vyjayanti talk about the ID principles. Some of it comes from software, but some of it comes from the processes around the software. So we want to make sure that there's enough inclusion in there. Standards and interoperability, I've touched upon this in terms of building other systems. And finally, the transparency and trust that we are able to bring through open source, through the best practices that we have. I think those are all things that will stand us in good stead. And I want to emphasize that the ID issuance and lifecycle is the only part that we will do, but we will enable the entire digital economy. We will be a part of what brings in financial inclusion, bringing access to banking, for governments, the benefits delivery, which has been very much highlighted during this pandemic, emergency support, healthcare, civil registration, departmental IDs. All of these are areas where we think a digital ID system will bring in a lot of benefit. It will reduce cost. It will bring in benefits to the users. And this, we think, will help us get to a borderless economy, Pan-African economy. That's really, I think we have seen this vision earlier in Africa, and we would like to do our best to support it. So that's really our vision, is that with open standards and frameworks, we will help build components and tooling that will give us the services, which will enable countries to utilize the ecosystem we build to support the people as best as they can and to improve their lives. For this, we have the platforms, we have the applications, and the frameworks coming in place. And that's really, I think, what we are about. With that, back to you, Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay. Wonderful. There are a few questions for you on the topic. The one recurring theme that seems to happen again and again is the question of sustainability. I'll read a question that came from the audience, and of course, we'll take a nuance on it. Open source software as a public good requires a large and diversified community of contributors to ensure its development and sustainability. What does MOSIP lack to have a community that is not solely dependent on India? So where are you in the process of creating the ecosystem globally in Africa and so that locally they can rely on what's available?
So one of the things that we have done is that to make sure that first, from our own organization perspective, we have made sure that we have got enough funding which will allow us to sustain ourselves, to build and develop the product so that countries can depend on it in a very easy way. We can get the support they need to get going. And once we have our own strength, we find that that will attract other developers to come in, because people want to come in and support things that they know are going to live and last for long. And that, in that sense, we felt it was very important for us to make sure that we had a good product, and we are ready to do that. We have put it out on open source. We continue to engage with other developers within India and outside to bring them into the ecosystem so that they can contribute to areas that they believe they are best suited to contribute. In addition to this, we have spoken about the partnership with universities that will enable people to first start studying the system and then eventually to start contributing to it. Some of these will be within Africa. For example, the CMU Center in Africa is one of the places we are going to be working with, and we are looking for further university support there. In addition to that, I think we will expect to see a large community of people building applications on top of it. And that, I think, is a global effort. And that's something which, once you have a very solid foundation, we will get. So overall, I think we are taking a very measured approach to building an ecosystem which will give people the confidence that they can trust what we are doing.
Excellent. Okay. Anybody wants to join the community voices? We've opened it. So please join in and voice your opinions. While you're raising your hand, if anybody's interested, I'd like to explore with you, Sanjay, another thing that people are wondering about. They don't understand the cost of ownership initially and the cost of ownership over time. Could you explain the model for MOSIP? What do they expect to be paying throughout the life cycle?
Sure. So MOSIP provides an open source core platform, which is really the software itself. But then once you implement the ID system, you're going to need, if you're using biometrics, you need biometric service providers, you need a system integrator who will build the system for you, somebody to set up data centers and provide the services, security, etc. around that. So all of those costs and procurement will still have to be done to get an ID system up and running. Beyond that, the benefits that come from something like MOSIP are actually that you don't have to depend on the vendor. Tomorrow, if something goes wrong, you can change a system integrator, you can bring in a new person. The source code is out there, and we'll hopefully have enough people who are trained and certified with MOSIP to be able to do that. In addition, because it is adopted by multiple countries, applications that are built for one country, say for example, a social protection register, can start to be used in other countries as well. And that makes applications easily available. So that's where we think the costs will start to come down, because the cost of software itself is a small part of an overall rollout. And while we reduce that a little bit, that's not going to be the biggest benefit. The biggest benefit comes because you don't have to, when you bring in when the first contract expires, you bring in a new vendor and then you do this whole thing all over again. You don't have to do that. Then you build in the applications. You don't have to migrate everybody to new applications when you change your core systems. And those costs start to come down. So I think we will start to see the costs come down more on a usage than very much at the beginning of the project.
Okay, one quick question to you as well. The audience is wondering, is there any plans to look at open source biometric algorithms? You don't include biometric algorithms in your open source package. Will you be considering making MOSIP also include open source algorithms?
So at this point, we would love to see good open source biometric algorithms. That's not an expertise we have. And so if somebody puts together good open source biometric algorithms, we would be happy to work with them and put together a open source module that might support it. But at this point, like I said, we don't have the expertise to bring in the biometric algorithms, and we work with partners who would do that. So in the same way, if they can get an open source biometric partner, great, wonderful.
Okay, and once again, if you want to be on the Community Voices, raise your hand. I'll just ask you one last question, which is coming in from the audience, and I'll read. What is missing for MOSIP to implement OSIA, Open API, because it is of interest to user countries for interoperability? So back to you.
Yeah, one of the things about what we see with OSIA is that, I think it's a standard in the making. The companies have come together and they've started to specify it. I don't think it's anywhere near complete yet for us to be able to promise it. Because last time when we had the conversation, we went in, a lot of the API pages led to, really TBDs. And I think while we think it's a great effort that the industry's got together, I think there is a lot more work to be done to make it a reality. And in addition to that, I think the existing implementations of those sort of software in there will have to be upgraded to support those interfaces. And we think it's very straightforward to build on top of MOSIP. So tomorrow, if you want to build a connector to a system that is in there, they have an open interface, we should be able to build it up right away. In fact, it's a good open source project to say, in my country, I have an implementation of X product, and I want to integrate MOSIP with that. It should be very easy to build and put it back into open source so that the rest of the world can benefit. I think that's something we would love to encourage and work with them and make it happen. So.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. Thank you so much. There's a lot of questions for you, so feel free to go in and answer some of them. We don't have time to take all of them. But maybe stick around near the end with some closing thoughts. We'll continue with the program now with OpenCRVS, and I'd ask Ed, please, to take the screen for a quick presentation on OpenCRVS. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Thank you to ID for Africa for having us. I'm Edward Duffus from Plan International. I'm representing OpenCRVS today. Let me launch my presentation. You should see that now. Is that right, Joseph?
Yes, we see it.
Super. So OpenCRVS is a collaborative project worked on by a number of partners, just not Plan International. You can see some of them at the bottom here. It's really about universal registration of births and deaths with this presentation within an ecosystem of digital public goods for identity. And I'm going to split it into two parts. The first part is really about what is the OpenCRVS product, where does it come from, how does it fit within this identity ecosystem? And then the second part is really drilling into the digital public goods and the value of OpenCRVS as a digital public good. So OpenCRVS is, as you've heard now, an example of a digital public good to help achieve universal civil registration and evidence-based decision-making in all country contexts. But let's explore for a second how civil registration fits within this context of identity. So here's an example, sort of reference architecture, perhaps, of a foundational identity ecosystem. And the first thing to say, you can see civil registration at the bottom of this diagram. First thing to say is legal identity is established from birth, and it's established through laws of each country through the civil registration system. So not only is birth registration a fundamental right in itself, you can see through integration and as part of a digital ecosystem that you can see here, it's providing birth and death registration data to ensure the integrity of the entire identity ecosystem, potentially linked with a national population register, certainly with the unique identification system, such as we just heard about from MOSIP. It's then providing access and is the root of that trust. Sanjay spoke about the trust within MOSIP, but birth registration is the root of that trust from the legal identity established at birth, which then goes on throughout a person's life to then give access to the service delivery functions, which you can see at the top here, all the way from financial inclusion, healthcare, social safety nets, etc. So it's really an integral part of the identity ecosystem, also linked together with health systems and the National Statistics Office and vital statistics, and we'll come back to that shortly. So as such an integral piece of the identity ecosystem, there is unfortunately a problem, and that is that in a lot of countries, the civil registration system is broken. So birth registration rates less than 50% are quite prevalent in African countries, and around the world, around 2/3 of all deaths are not registered at all. So we need to look at why that is. Three main reasons. Firstly, the legal and regulatory constraints often make universal civil registration practically impossible, particularly within rural and hard to reach locations. On the right-hand side here, you can see Solomon showing off the records within the National Births and Deaths Office in Freetown in Sierra Leone, admittedly some few years ago now when I met him. And obviously the paper-based systems which have been used for many years are not working, particularly in low resource settings. And thirdly, the digital civil registration solutions which are out there and being used by countries certainly have great potential, but they're currently poorly designed, either homegrown solutions built by governments or those solutions built by vendors, obviously with the same problems as we mentioned a couple of times in terms of vendor lock-in of those solutions and not really fit for purpose. So here's a high-level view of some of the work which we've been doing recently, which led up to the creation of OpenCRVS. That light bulb moment was back at the end of 2016, where we recognized there was a need for, a little bit inspired by the work of DHIS2 in some of the open source health products that Liv referred to. We knew there was a need for a high-quality CRVS systems, that's civil registration and vital statistics system, that's available as a digital public good. So we kicked off in 2017, we built an early prototype, we shared it with countries to get their feedback on the functionality which it showed. The feedback was very positive. Beginning of 2019, we started building the core product itself. we established a technical advisory group of different development partners and countries to help us understand what a rights-based civil registration system would actually look like. We did that in iterations. We started a project in Bangladesh to configure OpenCRVS for the Bangladesh context. We did a lot of design research in the field, understanding what it meant to be a user of such a system and how families and individuals interact with the civil registration system to really drive a human-centered design approach into the way in which we built OpenCRVS. End of 2019, we also did a proof of concept in Africa, in Zambia, proving that model and configuring OpenCRVS for the Zambian context. In January of this year, we published the source code. That was a proud moment. And since then, we've been working on some extensions to the core product, particularly focusing on interoperability, which you've heard a number of times now, particularly interoperability with health systems. And we've done that via the Open Health standard, Open Data Standard, HL7 FHIR standard, which we've been leveraging for integration between health systems and OpenCRVS, and more recently with MOSIP, as Sanjay referred to. And the second yellow star there is being recognized as a digital public good as per the Digital Public Good Alliance Standard 1.0, and we're very looking forward to the benefits that that's going to bring for the product and reference implementations as we go forwards. So I'm not going to dive into the technical details of the product, but I wanted to run through what some of the commitments were which we made for OpenCRVS from the very beginning. Of course, we want it to be open source, so no license fees or ties to specific vendors. We set ourselves a target that we wanted it to be configurable for all country contexts. So where as far as possible, configuration will be required in country rather than customization and lengthy development cycles. We want it to be interoperable with other government systems. We've mentioned national ID and health systems are good examples. And highly accessible to ensure inclusion even in the remote areas, because we know that the lowest levels of birth and death registration are in the hard to reach areas and in remote locations. Really important, as the source of trust for identity ecosystem, it was really paramount that we built in safeguards to secure and keep personal data confidential and protected. That was the next commitment. And we also wanted to ensure that as we provided a product to countries, we wanted to make it as easy to deploy as possible, even in the low resource settings. So we wanted to make it really easy to pick up the code, configure it and deploy it and start using it. And finally, because we felt that just digitizing existing models of civil registration was not going to cut it, we wanted to enable new models of civil registration, in particular models which promotes an active form of civil registration. So that's not the passive form where civil registration staff would sit typically in a district civil registration office and wait for people to come and apply for birth certificates and death certificates, but actually to be out in the community using community registration agents to collect birth and death registration data at source. So let's have a look at a few features of OpenCRVS just to bring it to life. I can't do a demo for you today, but I'd love to, and we've done them in the past. So one of the features is about being able to use OpenCRVS on handheld devices, tablets, or mobile phones in offline and low connectivity settings, for example, in rural communities. So as a design principle, all of the application can be used in such contexts. And you can see maybe on the right-hand side, beyond being able to work in an offline or low connectivity settings, and that's really important because sometimes the line between being connected and not is a gray area. It's really important that the system tells the user what's going on. So you can see on the right-hand side, applications which someone has completed, they're waiting to send. They have not been sent because you're offline. The second area I just want to highlight here is going back to interoperability. So OpenCRVS working with other systems, including health and national ID, because we found the problem is that systems typically are operating in silos. You have your health systems working within the Ministry of Health environment, and then you have civil registration systems, and they're not talking to each other. And so we've invested a lot of time and effort to ensure that through open data standards, and you can see at the bottom the HL7 FHIR standard is the one which we've been using, really the default standard health interoperability standard now, and we've done that using the OpenHIM, another open source platform created by Gembi Health Systems. That's the health interoperability mediator, and that really allows us to integrate very easily with other systems. And you can see an example on the right, and most recently we've proven technical integration with DHIS2 in Bangladesh. And the third area, and the final area I just want to highlight here, is another perspective. So we found that those countries that had low performing civil registration systems, birth and death registrations were low. They had very little visibility of the data under and overperforming parts of the country. So what we've created is real-time operational monitoring, visualizations and dashboards to give the headline registration rates and to allow staff at a regional or national level to really be able to spot what's going on within the system and to take corrective action and to support, potentially provide additional training or additional resources where it's required. You can see an example on the right giving over time birth registration rates slowly increasing in Bangladesh. So as I said, the sort of second half part of the presentation is really about how we see OpenCRVS and its value proposition as a digital public good. And hopefully this will resonate with some of the things which Liv mentioned. So the first thing to mention is that we believe that by creating OpenCRVS and the investments, the financial investments and the effort gone into it to create a high quality product, we think that's really important as a value proposition that countries can leverage that previous investment of that high quality product. So the high quality product is now we have a better definition of what high quality looks like through the DPG standard 1.0, but it includes obviously details on data security, data confidentiality, documentation, open source code, the way in which it's documented and it can be deployed, and the links to policies to ensure that it's implemented in the right way. The second is that countries get the flexibility to choose the system integrators that they want to support their system, either to develop it or to maintain it over time. So OpenCRVS is not owned by one provider. So the countries have the choice to stay with one system integrator, swap between the system integrator which builds and develops, integrates and deploys OpenCRVS and the one which maintains it, and they can swap in and out system integrators or suppliers over time as they like. And we think that's very important. There's also an opportunity for innovation on top of the existing product. Because OpenCRVS is open source, it's publicly published, we're expecting that there are contributions in terms of building on top additional features which are going to extend and innovate in the civil registration space. As you've seen from the numbers around the world, it's very much required. And to use Liv's sandbox analogy, OpenCRVS provides that sandbox to innovate in the civil registration space. We think OpenCRVS will enable greater ownership actually of the civil registration system, either by countries in themselves, or we think really interestingly, OpenCRVS is being used as a regional asset, potentially across Africa. There was a call some 2 years back at a ministerial conference in Mauritania for common civil registration digital assets. And OpenCRVS is squarely in that space, providing that for countries, which will, the next point, allow countries to potentially share resources, human resources, expertise, and to provide peer-to-peer support for one another and learning based on their reference implementations. And finally, we think... Yes, Joseph?
Could you please wrap up so that we can have some questions?
Surely, I will do. I'll zip through the final slides. I'll give the most important features.
Okay.
Creating a standard of civil registration within the foundational identity ecosystem. And that's, I think, an important slide that I want to propose here. We think this is really exciting, showing that same diagram I showed before, foundational identity through digital public goods very soon is very much a reality. The foundational identity piece supported by systems like MOSIP and OpenCRVS, health systems through a range of different open source products at that level, all providing that foundational identity piece. Finally, because people always ask, and it's probably a question anyway, in terms of implementation, rough timelines, which we're advising, is that countries would look at an initial really short phase, and open source software allows them to do that, which is 3 to 4 months, concentrating on really a minimal country configuration to get OpenCRVS up and running in a country at low cost, minimal time, to see how it can work in context, and decide whether it's a product which is going to fit the needs of the country without the need to procure long-term service agreements up front for 3 or 4 years. You can bring in OpenCRVS, test it out and see whether it's going to be applicable, and then prepare for scale, larger integrations, and then deploy at scale. I am at the end, Joseph. If you want more information, you can see the links here. We have the code repository in GitHub for the technical folks. Please go check that out. Full documentation at our documentation site and our website at opencrvs.org. All the information, and indeed, if you want to reach out for support and more information, do so via the website. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed, for this presentation. I'd like to bring in somebody from the community voices, so operator, please elevate them. But while you're doing that, can you please remind the audience what countries are already implementing OpenCRVS? There are some questions about that in the chat.
Certainly. So we have conducted, a pilot implementation of OpenCRVS. We really tested it out this year in Bangladesh. We ran a proof of concept in Zambia. It was a short piece of work to really prove that OpenCRVS meets the needs of the African context in the Zambia context last year. There are a number of countries currently requesting support through RFPs, for which we're responding together with partnerships and consortiums. I'm not at liberty to give that full list. I think that that will come out in due course, but there's quite a long list of countries which will hopefully soon become reference implementations.
Okay, thank you, Ed. And then we have Stephanie, who's going to be joining us for the community voices, but there's a question that's coming up again for Ed, specific to you. Just very quickly, what support do countries need in order to be able to work with you and implement an OpenCRVS? Just 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, we're hoping that because the source code is publicly available, it's extremely well documented. Countries with a good system integrator are going to be able to do it with minimal support from us. We've already had pretty conclusive feedback on that. But obviously, the skills are required in terms of service design research to get the civil registration model right first and foremost, and then use OpenCRVS as an enabler of that model. That's really important. You won't be able to implement OpenCRVS and imagine it's going to meet all your needs. It needs to be designed and configured for your local context.
Okay, thanks, Ed. Stephanie, welcome. Stephanie De La Briole from Secure Identity Alliance.
Yes, thank you very much, Joseph. I just had 1 or 2 comments and invitation to make. The first comment is to Sanjay Jain's presentation. I just want to, I'm not sure when Sanjay Jain actually last looked at the GitHub platform, because yesterday we published V5 of the specification of OSIA, which is a very developed specification. And we also demonstrated live interoperability amongst vendors. So this is not a bunch of vendors getting together to create interoperability. OSIA is a true interoperability framework, gathering today a community of 35 government, 15 government, in fact, and 20 public and private companies working on this interoperability framework. And I would take this opportunity to re-invite MOSIP and our friend Edward from Plan International to now join the initiative to make sure that OSIA, that OpenCRVS implement, the OSIA API, so that we really achieve full interoperability in the ecosystem with a legacy system, new system, open source system, a true interoperability framework on the market. This is what OSIA is about. Thank you, Joseph.
Okay, thank you. Just to emphasize as well that OSIA will be presented in detail and will be discussed in the January 14 livecast, which SIA will be participating. So that's an opportunity for people to also hear about the latest developments. If anybody from the panel would like to come back on and respond, we're fine with that. Thank you, Stephanie, for the feedback. Edward, thank you so much. There are a lot of questions for you as well, but please go through the chat and see if you can answer them offline. And then we are going to continue with the program with Lesley-Ann Vaughn from Mojaloop Foundation. Leslie, thank you for joining us. Edward, say goodbye to you, but you'll come back at the end. So, Lesley, so please take the floor and present.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Can you see my screen okay, Joseph?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I can resonate with so many of the thoughts that are going on today in the conversation. Exactly the same thing is happening in the MOSIP world. It's really quite exciting to see. We focus on a particular vertical that is parallel to the identity movement, but almost just as foundational, because what you need an identity for is to improve your life, upgrade your life, and financial inclusion is a big part of that. And that's where we focus in on payments. We all know this story. So many of our world don't have access to financial services. And yet McKinsey say that actually if we had an interoperable real-time payment network, that potentially there is 3.7 trillion in the economy that is being missed today. We'll see. Africa is a special place. Africa, it was the home of M-Pesa. And it's created an industry and a movement around non-bank financial services. And that's quite different to quite a lot of the rest of the world. And it means that when we think about interoperability, there's something different to be done. What's happening today is a lot of siloed systems are being interconnected to each other in the financial systems ecosystem. And they're not truly knowing how each system works, and things are being hooked together. It's quite an expensive, informal way to get things done. So our focus is on how do we help move money more simply? How do we help get last mile actors to a place where they are completely part of the ecosystem, first-class citizens? We believe that interoperability will enable the innovation needed to make digital payments inclusive and affordable while pouring money into the transaction economy and supercharging the ecosystem. There are so many fintech actors in the African context. There are so many investments going on in this context. How do we supercharge that by making their job easier?
Lesley-Ann, can you put presentation in presentation mode? So
yes, I'll try.
It's bigger.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
There you go. Good. Thank you, Joseph. This is possible in the Western world today. But the reality is, as we've been hearing from the other presenters on stage, that actually RFPs are broken. The process by which we go about procuring national payment system software is totally based on a model that requires us to know about the future before the future sometimes. And the world is changing at pace. So maybe there's a way to use open source to help us understand what exactly we want in our ecosystem. And that's kind of the role that the Mojaloop team want to play. We are an open source public good, just like the other solutions that we've been hearing about today. We focus on financial services. We focus in on low cost, privacy by design, small infrastructure, and we use open source in our solution heavily. The Mojaloop Foundation was a new entity that was formed this year. It was formed in July, and it brings together member organizations that show you a mix of public and private sector. It was founded originally by work that was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but we've now got contributions coming through from people like Google, who are looking at the success that they find in India with national payment switches and going, how might we create an open source public good that helps other markets have that kind of design? We have companies in that membership that focus on central bank digital currencies. We have memberships that focus in on fraud and risk management done well, because no one wants to be the strongest link in a weak chain. We've heard so much already about the benefits of open source. It's exactly the same in the Mojaloop ecosystem, and part of the Mojaloop Foundation's role is to create that vibrant ecosystem, that marketplace of local talent that can help make these systems a reality. And a big part of the conversation is about the license fee. How do we remove the proprietary license fees that introduce costs that mean it's actually quite expensive to move money from one place to another, because those costs have to be sustained? We also hopefully will see benefits in the future from one person builds, everyone benefits. And one of our first examples of that is our integration with Google. The fact that they've created a design pattern, a blueprint for the open banking PISP model to help everyone in that ecosystem come together and open to the fintech ecosystem, so that we start to get a plethora of innovations on top of payments rails. We are also very confident in the ability of an open source community to have multiple eyes on software that helps us to find security problems and fix security problems in a community-driven way. We focus in the collaborative space. We don't work in the space where banks play, where non-banks play, where fintechs play, which is about account opening and pricing models and applications. That's for the ecosystem to work on, and the scheme to be designed just as today, and people to decide how consortiums should play together. What we focus in on is blueprints for acceleration of regulatory and governance frameworks, but we support the consultants and the payment system operators, that the ecosystem that helps design these systems with rules. And the software can be there as a blueprint to help simulate scenarios and help training and help design, as well as then actually being possible to run some rails. We have 3 deployments at the moment. We have a private sector deployment, which is in West Africa. It's Mawali. It's run between MTN and Orange, mobile money companies. They interoperate with each other. And we have TIPS in Tanzania. The national payment switch is looking at open source in this way. It's not live yet. As part of COVID, we have a microfinance project in Myanmar, which is about how do we help people make loan repayments without having travel, so they can actually connect to the mobile money companies and use their rails to send money to their loan repayments. It's got some central components that it focuses in on. It's an open loop system, which means that any player, big or small, should connect to the hub simply, cheaply, cost effectively, swiftly, if they're part of the scheme. It's real-time push payments only. We don't work with card payments. It's irrevocable. It's settled same day, and that's really important in a financial inclusion sense. It's important that we remove liquidity risk and we get money to people as quickly as possible. Real-time interoperable payments from a clearing level. And we very much focus on it being regulated by central bank. It's not a blockchain-centered solution, a cryptocurrency solution. It's about infrastructure that is government-led. And then behind it is the level 1 principles created by the Gates Foundation. They are the foundation of the design principles within the platform. And I think that they're familiar probably to a lot of you. We focus in on the realities of emerging markets in our design. We focus in on the fact that tiered KYC is very important for financial inclusion. We focus in on how do we make it really easy for the formal financial sector to work with those who are creating tiered KYC accounts. We also see the benefit of shared services when it comes to fraud and security protection. So we have a project underway, which is about helping entities think about how do we have shared fraud and risk management services that can help with consumer protection initiatives. There's a lot more content behind Mojaloop. There's a presentation that's an hour long. This is just a starting pitch. In terms of the level 1 principles, there's also a lot of content online, and there's a full training program at IIPS certification. Anyone's welcome to contact me as well if they want to find out more. But I recognize that this is an identity forum, and I'm very much a friend of the ID for Africa movement. I think it's very important that identity is foundational and payments are part of the overall story. So thank you very much, Joseph, for inviting me today.
Thank you, Lesley-Ann. Again, if anybody would like to ask any questions from Lesley-Ann, please raise your hand and join the panel. While we're looking, if there's anybody interested, Lesley-Ann, when we look at payment systems in Africa, we find in many cases, one of the big barriers is the regulatory framework that the central banks put in place, whether it is for KYC, for anti-money laundering, or for financial inclusion policy, etc. How do central banks in developing countries view Mojaloop, and how do they work with you? I mean, you mentioned in Malawi you're working with a private entity. Did you have to first get cleared by the central bank?
So there's a private sector scheme not in Malawi, but in West Africa. It's called Mawali. Mawali is the brand name. And it's a joint venture between MTN and Orange. MTN and Orange have to play in a regulatory environment. They have to abide by regulatory principles of cross-border transfer. So yes, they have entirely had to figure out their way. And what they've done is they've first of all opened a corridor between Paris and Morocco, because that corridor has had regulatory approval. That's the reality though. A private sector needs to work with the regulators, and that's hard to show how does a non-bank do this well. And so that's where the Mojaloop Foundation are looking at how do we look at regulatory sandboxes? How do we help regulators understand that this is actually a secure, open source way to think about cross-border transfer, about fund security, about liquidity, about risk and settlement. And we want to be working with other standards bodies, but we also have an API standard that is being adopted in certain scenarios. It works very well for a situation where you have a non-bank and a bank working together and needing to think about how the rules are different between those different players. It's a big part of our value proposition.
Just to summarize, there's another question in that regard. There's asking what approvals required from central bank to implement this in the country, or do you need telecom operators on board for this?
The thing is, it's a payments switch. So in Tanzania, long before the regulators were involved in technology and centralized switch, there was interoperability in Tanzania between mobile money players. The regulators required it. They decided that it was important. And so it was done without a switch. It was done with bilateral connections, which worked perfectly until it didn't. And when does it not? It doesn't work whenever things go wrong and you need to figure out ways to kind of have consumer protection measures. You need to have ways to get more people connected in a cost-effective manner. And it works great when you have 3 players, but when you have 5 or 20 or 500, when it is the case when it comes to SACCOs and microfinance, it's much harder to go the bilateral direction. But switches are expensive. And so Mojaloop is about how do we help people with the cost of moving money and having fewer integrations and being able to harness the benefits of open source. We think the blueprints are good. We think the blueprints are ways for people to learn about each other. And that's actually a benefit in its own right.
Now, Lesley-Ann, data sovereignty on the Mojaloop, you're not running it from outside the countries. The Mojaloop platforms stay in the country?
Mojaloop is software, and the deployment model is decided by whoever's deploying it. So in Tanzania, they are hosting it locally. In the case of the private scheme, they have been able to accelerate to market because they're using cloud services. They're using Microsoft Azure. So the deployment, just like every other digital public good, the deployment model matters, and it's a local decision based on those who are deploying.
Okay. There are quite a few questions continuing on that regard. They're saying, is it digital public good where central bank can get it and deploy it, or you can have multiple deployments from different entities in the same country?
So we are actively working with a number of different actors. I can't really talk about too many of them at the moment, but it ranges from central banks to banks who want to connect to each other privately in a country nationally, where they know they need interoperability and they want to get it going. The reality is that for us to reduce the cost, we need volumes. We don't, Mojaloop doesn't. A country, a market needs volumes of transactions so that the cost of running the switch is sustainable and as low cost as possible, because we want our partners to run not for loss. So you don't need lots of switches in a country, but you do need open loop access, which means it needs to be really easy for every financial player, bank or non-bank licensed, to be able to participate. And that is at the core of how we think about interoperability and open loop, which is a little bit more than interoperability.
I understand. Now, what kind of...
The future is internet payments. The future is how do we connect multiple of these things together? And that's the vision. Right.
One last thing, Lesley. How does digital identity fit in Mojaloop? What kind of platform for digital identity do you hook up to? Do you hook up to the national ID? Do you hook up? Please explain that and wrap up. Thank you.
So we don't open accounts. The accounts are opened by the financial entities. And so regulated entities work across system. What we have is an account lookup system, a proxy system that allows you to more stably manage the fact that a person is not a phone number. A person is not a bank account. A person might have 5 bank accounts. And how do you help manage that? A person is a person moment. And so we have part of our design, which is helping people to have choice. They can move between banks. They can have multiple bank accounts, but their identity system is separate and account opening is separate. Interoperability is at an infrastructure level.
I understand. Okay, very interesting. Please try to answer some of the questions that are coming in the Q&A in the chat. We don't have time to cover those. We'd like to switch to country views on open source. Thank you, Diane, for participating. And we'll bring you back for just parting with words of wisdom. So now, operator, please bring in the countries that are represented here. I think Ethiopia and Guinea, we have 3 representatives. Please bring them all at the same time. Ibrahima Conde from Guinea, Yodahe Zemichael from Ethiopia, and Mori Kamara from Guinea. So what I'd like to start with is Yodahe. Yodahe, you recently signed an MOI with MOSIP. You announced that you've signed an MOI with MOSIP. What is the intended use for your project? What is your project and what do you intend to use MOSIP for?
Thanks, Joseph. So the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the Ethiopian ID program and the Indian Institute of Technology, Bangalore. The objectives are, first of all, to evaluate the platform via a pilot program where we are going to test it very vigorously in the lab, in a lab format, in the laboratory format, customizing it for the Ethiopian local context, language-wise, legislation-wise. And then after the lab phase is over, we'll test it in a field setting with a minimum of 30,000 registrations. So the objective is first to evaluate the platform, and then to design and implement, perform a field rollout, assess, and hopefully in the end, after we do our due process and learn the platform well, contribute, become a contributor towards the community, to the open source community. So those are the objectives of the MOU.
But will you be using it if all the pilots were successful? Is this intended to be also a national deployment for a national project like a national ID? What is the long-term vision?
Yes, absolutely. So far we are doing in the last 5.5 months, we are customizing it and testing it with different hardware devices, biometric devices, and interfaces with EVIS. So far the results are very, very encouraging. We have been able to, with minimal support from the MOSIP team, our local integrator, we have assembled an integration team, because one of the primary objectives of the government is to be owners of technology instead of the primary fear you have mentioned, the vendor lock-in, the fear of vendor lock-in. So from the point of view of technology ownership, we have assembled an integrator team, and the results are encouraging. So if it's successful, definitely we will base our middleware on MOSIP for our national ID program.
Okay, so hold on to that thought. I'd like to move to Ibrahima. Ibrahima, je vais parler avec vous en français. Operator, can you bring me the translator to be live as well, so that whatever Ibrahima says can be available to the other panelists? Ibrahima, c'est la même question que je posais à Yodahe. Okay. Vous avez signé un accord avec MOSIP et ça fait maintenant peut-être 1 an que vous travaillez avec MOSIP. Et pour quel projet vous avez choisi MOSIP? Et juste décrit le projet.
Ok, merci.
Attendez juste une seconde. If there is no translator coming live, what we'll do, Ibrahima, vous parlez lentement et moi je vais traduire en temps réel.
Ok. Donc, merci M. Atik pour cette opportunité. Le programme WURI est un programme de la Banque mondiale qui vise à donner un titre d'identité au maximum de personnes dans la zone.
Okay, so it's a WURI project that is supposed to give identity for everybody in Guinea.
Exactly. Donc, dans le cas guinéen, nous avons misé pour une approche pilote. Une approche pilote avec à cœur le renforcement de capacités locales.
With the idea of also supporting the local capacity.
Et une des pistes de solution, c'était choisir de l'open source.
One of the decisions for the project was to select open source.
Nous avons choisi le MOSIP dans ce cadre.
We select in this context.
Et aujourd'hui, il y a eu la première phase qui était l'apprentissage et connaître la philosophie qui a derrière le MOSIP.
Okay, our first phase was to learn and understand the philosophy and strategy of MOSIP.
À la suite de cette phase d'apprentissage et de signature du MOU, nous avons identifié les ressources clés. Nous avons identifié des ressources clés qui pouvaient faire miroir avec l'équipe MOSIP.
We identified the key resources that need to interface with MOSIP, the team of MOSIP.
Nous avons fait 2 mois sur cette phase et ensuite, cette équipe a identifié les besoins qui sont effectifs pour la Guinée.
Okay, so basically it's been 2 months and this team has been identifying the needs that will be required for Guinea to do the implementation.
Et cela avec l'implication des points focaux qui proviennent de différents ministères.
Okay, and so this is working with the key points, key representatives of the various ministries. So c'est une équipe qui représente tous les parties prenantes.
Il y a le comité de pilotage et il y a aussi l'équipe technique. Le projet est porté par la primature. Avec, dans le comité de pilotage, nous avons des représentants de tous les ministères parce que l'identification est une problématique transversale.
OK. Attendez un moment. Peut-être, Maury, ça sera mieux si c'est vous fera l'introduction parce que vous êtes en contexte de pays en même temps. Et je reviendrai vers vous pour poser des questions sur votre vision comme end user dans ce domaine. Alors, Maury, en anglais, expliquez le comité qui sont sur place maintenant.
Thank you, Dr. Adik. So as my colleague said, the exciting part of the WURI project in Guinea is that it involves all of the stakeholders in the identity environment and community. So all of the ministries that are involved, all the partners, all the players in the field are involved in the discussion. And the capacity building aspect is really, really tremendous. So this has been a welcome project in Guinea as an end user. What is important to us is we build indeed those capacity. And to piggyback on what Lesley-Ann had said, we have a very vibrant community of players and developers and private entities, especially in the financial and banking system. The mobile application and transaction are tremendous. So I was happy to hear MOSIP said that open standard was a vehicle because integration into those applications will be a must. As a
Maury, on va revenir. On va revenir.
Okay, sure.
Merci. Ibrahima, alors, continuez s'il vous plaît. Vous avez maintenant le décomité. Vous avez mis en place la capacité nécessaire. Et
exactement.
Où êtes-vous dans le projet, l'exécution du projet?
Aujourd'hui, en prenant comme socle le MOSIP, nous avons une plateforme guinéenne qui est la plateforme UNIR, qui permet de faire l'enrôlement des Guinéens et des résidents en Guinée et de délivrer des identifiants uniques.
Et
aussi,
unique.
Un identifiant unique, oui. Un identifiant unique. Oui.
Okay. Maury, can you explain where Guinea is in English?
So they have developed a platform called the UNIR that allows to do the registration, the enrollment of the citizen and provide a unique identifier included in it.
Est-ce que l'identifiant unique, vous le faites après la déduplication? C'est un enrôlement biométrique.
Exactement, c'est un enrôlement biométrique. Il y a tout ce qui est déduplication, tout ce qui est vérification via le moteur du MOSIP, le moteur de duplication, exactement.
OK, Maury.
So the MOSIP engine is used for the D for the deduplication process. It's a biometric enrollment, and indeed, deduplication is executed.
OK. Ibrahima, pour l'enrôlement en masse, où êtes-vous? Ça va commencer quand?
Okay, so I will try to speak in English. The first phase will be a pilot phase. We will try to enroll 4,000 people in with 8 regions of Guinea. And then after evaluating the MOSIP as a pilot, we'll decide how to go.
Okay. So, in your vision, where do you see the end game over time? Where will you be, let's say, in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Will you enroll the population in what length of time?
The project WURI is for 5 years. The end game will be to enroll 80% of the population, basically 12 million, in 2025. Okay. And also provide services using this identification system.
Okay, link it to services. Okay.
Exactly.
Now, Yodahe, what considerations went into your mind as a committee when you were assessing what pathways to take for the National Identity Project? What type of analysis led you to the decision that you want to go an open source route?
Okay, thanks, Joseph. The considerations were technology neutrality and interoperability, because we have seen, we have done some studies on the kind of ecosystem, kind of devices, and the challenge other national ID programs faced elsewhere. And in choosing MOSIP for our pilot, our primary considerations were interoperability, technology neutrality, and also, of course, open source, which gives you a sense of technology ownership. So those were the considerations, and it was our understanding that the only one that ticks all these boxes was, at least the one which was mature enough to be tested for a pilot, was MOSIP.
OK. OK. Ibrahima, la même question. Si vous pouvez répondre en anglais, ça sera mieux. What analysis went into your mind in making the decision to move in this direction for your national ID?
You know, MOSIP have some key features that was interesting in order to deploy our identification system. Mm-hmm. One of those quality was modularity. The technical team were able to customize and to develop some private modules used in Guinea. There is also a key principle in MOSIP, which is privacy by design. We are talking about a population registry. It's essential. The security of these data is essential. And also we had a great community during this month, basically 9 months of collaboration. The team of MOSIP was very collaborative.
Okay. Okay, merci. Maury, I'm looking at you from the perspective of an end user organization, but also somebody who has a significant interest. Your agency is the one that is involved in the digital governance, e-government of your country. So looking at that from that perspective, what considerations do you look at in advising the Prime Minister's office or advising the President's office and advising the strategy for the country regarding an implementation, whether it's an open source, an open API? What are the things that give you concern and what are the things that give you confidence in this chosen strategy?
Well, most of the concerns have been expressed already. Security is always number one. So the application of the service has to be secure. Number two, the ability for the government entities to take ownership of the product. So it has been assessed. The interoperability, because as I was going to say previously, we have tremendous amount of legacy systems that we don't have the capacity or the means to replace at the present time. So the ability to communicate with those legacy systems for us is also paramount. And in the end, of course, is value, the value to the system. Does it make sense to invest? Will it be scalable? Will we be able to customize it? So most of the concerns that we have as a user have been expressed in the presentation that my colleague has made here.
Excellent. So an excellent list: security, ability to interoperate, ownership. You've got a lot of legacy systems, so you can't just continually buy things and leave them sitting there. They need to integrate well. The cost, ownership over time, the scalability. Will you grow with the growth needs of the population? Excellent list of considerations, and you feel that the committee, the comité de pilotage, is been looking at all these factors and guiding the strategy.
Oh yes, the steering committee is essential. I don't believe that MOSIP or the WURI initiative would have gone that far without the involvement of all the members of the steering community, because they all have a say in it and they're able to express their concern and present and steer the project to fit their goals and objectives. So indeed, it does.
Thank you. Excellent. I want to ask Yodahe one closing point, and then Ibrahima. Yodahe, do you have any advice or recommendations for other countries, knowing now from your experience, you have not yet implemented, but you've gone through some of the capacity building, assessments, etc. What advice, 30 seconds, can you give countries in this journey?
I would definitely advise other ID implementation agencies, which are at least in the starting stage, to test the platform, to see its weaknesses, its strengths, and at the end of the day, an open source community becomes stronger as more members join, as more people contribute, and definitely addition of other countries into this testing of the MOSIP platform would have a significant impact on its future development, and it will become a more robust platform than it is now. Okay.
Ibrahima, do you want to add any advice to countries? And in the meantime, I see a raised hand. Please bring him on.
Yes, on this advice, what I would like to add is to check for interoperability. You see, when you are building an identity system, basically in Guinea, for example, we have some other system. We need to check if the system you are building can communicate with the others. That's essential. Instead of having a new one that is a silo.
Okay, so check the interoperability. Assure yourself it really does interoperate. I did see somebody raise their hand. Please join the panel. I'll elevate them to the panel. In the meantime, okay. Oh, this is audio, no video. Can I hear? Jonathan, are you on the panel? Okay, so in the interest of time, unfortunately, Jonathan, okay, so maybe this is an accident. So I'd like to bring back whoever is on the panel who's still with us for one closing message. Okay, so please bring back all the panelists. And my question is going to be, it's a philosophical question, but it's an important one nevertheless. So operator, bring back the panel. Today's session was focused on digital public goods. And in digital public goods, some critics of digital public goods say that digital public goods may be the death of intellectual property. Basically, a lot of companies invest in building intellectual property because they feel that's what gives them competitive advantages, and that's what gives them the incentive to actually invest in innovation. So, and this is a free-for-all question. Anybody that has any comment to make about this, do you feel there is a risk in the long run that if the world was all made up of digital public goods, that we will run the risk that we put lawyers out of commission? We don't need lawyers to file for patents, and we don't need to have people building intellectual property. Research labs might change in terms of their focus from being innovators to be in technology to being integrators and creating platforms for integration. So anybody would like to address this question? What do you say to the critics about the digital public goods having a negative side?
May I?
Yes, Sanjay, please.
So we have seen open source systems. For example, nobody's claimed that Linux has caused a lack of innovation in computer science, right? And so from that perspective, what happens is that as one layer becomes very standard, innovation moves above it and around it. And so clearly it does not cause the death of innovation. It's a progress for the entire humanity. It's just that we have moved to a new level. And while, you know, it is, so from that perspective, it is not the death of innovation complete at all. From another perspective, it is really a lot of the kind of systems that you're talking about within themselves, like for MOSIP, for example, we said that biometric algorithms have a lot of IP and a lot of specialization, and we would want to work with them. While the actual act of managing an ID, the interconnection between various systems and those processes are actually much more straightforward and standard. And that is what we encapsulate so that it makes it easy for everyone to adopt. So to that extent, we're really not looking at wiping out innovation, but building what is common and so that everybody can move forward very quickly.
So you're shifting innovation elsewhere. You're basically
correct,
right? And
just to add to that, I wish you had started with the country representatives first, Joseph, on this panel, because I think it says it all when you hear Ibrahima, Mori, and Yodahe talk about some of the decisions that are being taken. And I think the end game here is really about countries having greater control over their systems, providing a core digital platform, and then allowing for innovation that comes from private sector to grow on top of that. And so I think this is, there's nothing more to add, but I think it was just, it's great to hear some of the countries in Africa taking a leadership role in this and the demonstration effect that it can have for others.
I think also, I mean, ID4D, you have been promoting the Billion Challenge, and in there you're trying to promote a different kind of innovation, which still is open, right? I mean, you're moving in a direction where you are stimulating certain kinds of innovations that are responsive to where the needs are. I mean, where are you in promoting innovation?
You know, Mission Billion is just an opportunity to really crowdsource innovative solutions, because we know this agenda is far from complete. And so we've seen in last year's innovation theme was around privacy by design. This year's theme was around inclusion, and some wonderful innovations that have emerged from both public sector, private sector, and other organizations.
Okay. So yes, even though less lawyers may be needed to file for patents, there will still be innovators that are shifting somewhere else. And I think this is an ecosystem, and we just need to see how the various forces will evolve. Sanjay, you said it, Linux has been around. There are other proprietary systems, they can coexist and they can cooperate. So the issue here is giving choice and control to the end user. We've learned a lot from the survey that we've done in 2018. And we'll thank all of the initiatives that have responded, MOSIP, OSIA, and others, Open CRVS, who have responded. I mean, just to think, in a scale of 2 years, we went from having no options now to having options. So I thank everybody for their valuable contribution. Of course, Vyjayanti ID4D has been a champion for good, moving things forward and basically creating less barriers is definitely something that has helped and will help and will accelerate the adoption and inclusion. So I will thank everybody, unless anybody else on the panel wants to make a closing remark.
If I may.
Please, Sanjay.
It was very exciting to see, both Guinea and Ethiopia talk about the decisions they made, the empowering effect they have had in terms of how they have built up capacity to build their own systems, to build on top of what is out there. And, it's this Africa for Africa. And, really very, very glad to see it happen and see how we can support it even more. I think that's something I would love to see happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. ID for Africa will continue to accompany you on this journey, continue to accompany the countries, and we thank all the contributing organizations today. On the 14th of January, we will have actually the second part of this discussion. And of course, next week, we will have the Marathon of Innovations. So yes, there will be plenty of innovations that actually integrate with some of the things that we're talking about today. So thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.